Emily never imagined a personal loan would end with her name echoing inside a courthouse. She was 24. He was 55. Her employer, a man with power in the company and the community. 2 years ago, she'd thought he was doing her a kindness. Now she understood the truth. The money had solved one crisis in her life, but created another far worse. He wanted something she had never offered, her hand in marriage. And he was willing to use the loan, her job, and even the threat of public shame to get it. It wasn't just an argument anymore. It was legal now. There were papers, motions, and a hearing to decide what would happen next. As the court clerk read her name, Emily's stomach turned. The man she had once called a mentor sat just a few rows back, his eyes fixed on her as though she already belonged to him. Her friends didn't understand how it had come to this. Neither did her family. But Emily knew exactly when the chain had been fastened around her. It started the day he slid an envelope across his desk and told her not to worry about paying it back right away. It had been an ordinary Friday when Mr. Harper called her into his office. He was respected in the company, the kind of boss who spoke quietly but never had to repeat himself. Emily had been working there for just under a year, juggling rent, student loans, and medical bills from her mother's recent surgery. He didn't ask how she was managing. He already knew. "I can help you," he said, reaching for a plain white envelope. She tried to refuse, but he insisted. "It's not charity, it's just help." Inside was more money than she had ever seen at once, enough to cover what she owed and leave a little breathing room. She asked what he wanted in return. He waved the question away with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We'll talk about it when the time comes." At the time, she believed him. She convinced herself he was simply generous, that people with money could afford to be. But looking back now, she saw how carefully it had been set up, the way he'd watched her struggle, the way he'd waited until the pressure was unbearable. He hadn't given her an escape. He'd given her a debt with no expiration date. It began quietly, almost like courtship. He asked about her weekends, her friends, her plans for the future. She thought he was just making conversation. Then came the comments, how she spent too much time alone, how a young woman needs stability. When she mentioned dating someone her own age, his tone shifted. "Boys your age don't know what to do with a woman like you," he said. One evening, as she was gathering her things to leave, he blocked the doorway. "Why don't we make it official?" She laughed, thinking he meant a promotion. But his face stayed serious. He was talking about marriage. When she hesitated, he brought up the loan, not as a joke, as leverage. "You owe me," he said softly, like it was just a fact. "And I think this is the best way for both of us." She realized then that the loan had never been about money. It had been about control. And now he was cashing in. From that moment on, the walls closed in. At work, his tone toward her shifted, still polite in public, but laced with an unspoken claim. In meetings, he would glance at her like they shared a secret. Outside the office, he began showing up in places he had no reason to be. The grocery store where she shopped, the church her mother attended, the cafe she visited on Sundays. Her friends noticed. "He's around you too much," one warned. "That's not normal." But Emily couldn't explain it without sounding paranoid. How do you tell people your boss thinks he owns you without proof? The pressure grew. He hinted that refusing him might cost her more than her job. He reminded her that people talk, and not kindly, about women who take from men without giving back. The ring came on a rainy afternoon in the parking lot. No dinner, no romance, just a velvet box pressed into her palm like an ultimatum. "Think about it," he said. Though his tone made it clear thinking was a formality. And now, standing on the edge of a legal battle she never asked for, Emily knew the fight ahead would decide more than whether she married him. It would decide whether she kept her life her own. Once the ring was in her possession, even unopened, things changed. At work, people she'd spoken to daily suddenly seemed distant. Conversations paused when she walked into the break room. Invitations to after-work dinners stopped. It was as if word had spread, not about an engagement but about something worse, something whispered in fragments she was never meant to hear. Mr. Harper didn't need to say anything to make it happen. His influence was enough. He was a man others respected, or at least feared. If he wanted her isolated, she would be. Emily began eating lunch at her desk, avoiding eye contact. She stopped visiting the coffee shop downstairs, knowing he'd happen to be there. She kept her phone on silent to avoid the constant vibration of his texts. "We should talk. Have you thought about my offer? It's the right decision for you." Even at home, she felt watched. A black sedan would sometimes idle across the street, engine running, lights off. She couldn't prove it was his, but she knew. She knew the same way she'd known that the envelope he gave her wasn't free. She tried to talk to her mother about it, but her mother's voice wavered. "Honey, you can't fight men like him. They don't lose." That was the moment Emily realized she was alone in this. Not just at work, everywhere. The first real threat came disguised as a conversation. He called her into his office, shut the door, and leaned back in his chair. "I've been patient," he began, "but patience isn't endless." Emily stayed silent, clutching the strap of her bag like it was an anchor. "You know," he continued, "debts can be collected in many ways. A lawsuit for the money, a notice to the credit bureaus, and then, of course, there's your position here. If the board finds out you've been less than grateful for my generosity, it won't reflect well." It wasn't yelling. It wasn't even anger. That made it worse. His voice was calm, almost reasonable, like he was discussing weather or policy. "I don't want to ruin your life," he said, pausing just long enough for her to believe him. "I want to share it. I think we'd be good together. And frankly, I've already given you more than anyone else ever will." She left the office without answering, but the words stayed with her like the cold weight of a lock sliding into place. It was late, well after most employees had gone home, when she found herself alone in the hallway. Her shoes clicked against the polished floor, each step echoing. Then he appeared at the other end, hands in his pockets, moving toward her. "Emily," he said softly, almost warmly, as if this were casual. "We need to stop this dance." She tried to step around him, but he shifted just enough to block the path. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. You say yes, and everything becomes easy. No more debts, no more uncertainty." Her heart pounded, but her voice stayed steady. "I don't love you. I'm not marrying you." For a moment, the mask slipped. His smile vanished, and his eyes hardened into something that made her skin crawl. "You will," he said quietly. "One way or another, you will." She walked away without looking back, but the sound of his footsteps stayed in her ears long after she reached her car. The court date was still weeks away, but it felt as though the trial had already begun. Not in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. Articles began appearing online, some quoting anonymous sources from the company. The headlines were careful, not outright accusing her, but the implication was sharp enough. "Young employee accepts money from boss, later claims harassment." Her inbox filled with messages from strangers. Some were supportive, warning her to stay strong. Others were venom disguised as advice, telling her she should be grateful for his attention, that a man like that could give you the world. The company stayed silent, not because they didn't have a stance, but because their silence was its own statement. They would protect him, not her. Emily deleted her social media, stopped answering numbers she didn't recognize. But she couldn't avoid the whispers in the office halls, the glances that lasted just long enough to make her feel stripped bare. Mr. Harper, meanwhile, walked with the same easy confidence he always had. He never raised his voice, never lost his temper. In fact, he seemed to enjoy the shift in atmosphere. "See what happens when you make things messy?" he murmured one morning as they passed each other. "It doesn't have to be like this." When Emily met with her attorney, she hoped for reassurance. Instead, she got reality. "He's built a narrative," the attorney said, laying out a stack of documents. "And it's not just about the loan. He's framed it as a consensual arrangement, an understanding between two adults. Without proof of coercion, it's your word against his." She wanted to scream that the proof was in every look, every text, every subtle blockade in her life. But she knew the legal system didn't work that way. It wanted dates, screenshots, recordings, things she hadn't gathered because she'd never thought she'd need to. Her attorney leaned forward. "He's not just fighting to win, he's fighting to exhaust you. He wants you tired, scared, and willing to settle on his terms." Those terms hadn't changed. Marriage, public silence, a rewriting of history that made her the eager young bride and him the magnanimous benefactor. Emily left the meeting with a hollow certainty. This wasn't about love. It wasn't even about money anymore. It was about ownership, and men like him didn't let go of what they believed was theirs. The call came late at night. "I'll make this simple," his voice said through the line. "Marry me, and everything disappears. The case, the debt, the headlines. You walk away with a fresh start and more money than you've ever seen. Or," he let the silence hang long enough for her to feel it in her chest, "or you keep fighting, and I'll make sure the fight costs you everything." She didn't answer. Not then. Not after he hung up. but the words played on a loop in her head. By morning, she found an envelope slid under her apartment door. Inside was a plane ticket. One way, no return, to a city she'd never been to, for a date 2 weeks away. Alongside it was a note in his neat handwriting. For the honeymoon. Emily sat at her kitchen table, the ticket trembling in her hands. It was no longer a question of whether she could endure the pressure. It was a question of how far he was willing to go, and whether she could survive it. The ultimatum didn't break her, it clarified her. Emily stopped waiting for relief and started building a record. No speeches, no drama, just dates, times, messages. She pulled phone bills, archived voicemails, and exported texts. She wrote short summaries after every interaction with Mr. Harper. Where it happened, what he said, who might have seen them. Each entry was a brick. Quiet, heavy, undeniable. Her attorney urged discipline. Don't engage. Don't reply in heat. If he texts, acknowledge receipt and nothing more. So she did. Received. Noted. Please route through counsel. When he called late, she let it go to voicemail. When he lingered at her desk, she noted the time and the nearest witness. A former co-worker reached out, hesitant. I left last year, there were rumors even then. The woman wouldn't sign a statement yet, but she was willing to talk. She described the pattern. Favors, debt, pressure. Dates blurred, but the shape was clear. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it suggested a path. HR finally scheduled a meeting. 2 representatives sat across from her, careful, composed. They asked for her perspective and reminded her of company values. She kept her answers narrow. He offered a personal loan. He later tied repayment to marriage. He has interfered with my work and my reputation. They took notes without looking up. The meeting ended with a phrase that sounded like progress and felt like nothing. We'll review. That night, a letter arrived from a firm she didn't know. It accused her of defamation and malicious interference, demanded a retraction, and threatened damages. The signature wasn't his. He didn't need to sign it. His reach spoke for him. Still, the record grew. Voicemails with the same soft menace. A photograph of the plane ticket and the note. Calendar screenshots showing uninvited check-ins. A text where he used the word grateful like a lever. Emily's mother called, voice small. Sweetheart, are you sure you want to fight? Emily answered the only way she could. I'm already fighting. The question is whether I do it on paper. The call ended gently, but the distance stayed. By the week's end, the binder on her kitchen table was no longer thin. It had weight now. Not victory. Weight. Enough to remind her that truth, gathered patiently, can harden into something that holds. The first hearing wasn't about guilt or innocence. It was about posture, what each side would claim, and how firmly. The courtroom was ordinary. Rows of benches, a clock that ignored nerves, a judge who'd heard everything twice. None of it mattered compared to who sat where and what story survived the morning. His attorneys spoke first. They were cordial, almost warm. They called it a misunderstanding between 2 adults. They praised his long record of community leadership and implied she had recently changed her recollections. They never raised their voices. They didn't need to. They had paperwork and composed faces. Her attorney answered without theatrics. He used words like coercive, retaliatory, quid pro quo. He presented short exhibits, the loan offer with no terms, the honeymoon ticket, a string of messages that shifted from benevolent to binding. He didn't swing, he laid, brick after brick. When the judge asked Emily to confirm her statement, she stood, hands steady at her sides. No speech. Yes, Your Honor, she said. I accepted a personal loan during a crisis. Months later, my employer demanded marriage in return and used my debt, my livelihood, and his influence to pressure me. I am asking the court to protect my right to refuse. The judge nodded once. The simplicity was the point. Opposing counsel pushed for a gag order, arguing the media circus was harming reputations. Her attorney countered, the stories hadn't started with her. The judge split the difference. Limited restrictions, narrow and temporary. No grand pronouncements. Just the next date on the calendar, and a reminder that the law moves at its own tempo. Leaving the courtroom, Emily felt the peculiar quiet that follows restrained violence. Nothing had been resolved, but the shape of the fight had sharpened. In the hallway, he offered a familiar half-smile, the kind that once passed for kindness. There's still time to be reasonable, he said, as if they were discussing a meeting time. She didn't answer. Her attorney leaned in later. They wanted you rattled. You weren't. That matters. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like breath drawn evenly for the first time in weeks. Outside, cameras waited, but she kept her eyes forward and walked past. The hearing had not cleared her path. It had simply confirmed there was one, and that she would have to walk every inch of it. Pressure returned in a subtler form, practical, tedious, relentless. HR placed her on administrative leave pending review, with pay for now, but a pause that felt like suspension dressed in softer fabric. A landlord, suddenly attentive, sent a notice about renewal reconsideration. A bank flagged her account for a routine update that locked her card for 2 days. None of it bore his name. All of it carried his shape. Friends grew scarce. One texted apologies and claimed bad timing. Another stopped answering entirely. A cousin messaged a sermon-length warning about burning bridges. The small isolations worked like threads. Drawn together, they tightened. Still, the record deepened. Her attorney subpoenaed internal emails. A former assistant of his returned a call and spoke carefully. There were calendar entries that might matter, and a pattern of mentorship that looked different in hindsight. She would consider a statement. Consider. It was something. He played a different angle in public. Anonymous quotes about concern for a promising young employee. Phrases like miscommunication and unfortunate escalation. He cast himself as the patient adult. It was the oldest story. Frame control as care and coercion as romance gone awry. Late one evening, a package appeared at her door with no return address. Inside was a small black drive and a single line on a note. You don't know the half of it. Her attorney warned caution. Verify the source, scan it safely, assume nothing. They scheduled a secure review. Before that meeting could happen, a second envelope arrived, this one from the company. It cited concerns regarding professionalism and requested her appearance before an internal committee. No counsel allowed. A conversation among colleagues, it said, a phrase that sounded like hospitality and functioned like a trap. Emily sat with the two envelopes side by side, one possibly containing confirmation of a pattern, the other promising a room designed to redefine it. The clock on her phone crept forward. The hearing date loomed. The practical pressures multiplied. She steadied herself by returning to the basics. Dates, notes, copies, witnesses. Not strength that roars, but strength that lists. She added a new page to the binder. Internal committee. Questions to refuse, questions to answer briefly, questions to document afterward. She wrote 3 names of colleagues who had seen something and might, if asked correctly, admit enough to matter. When the secure review finally began, the first file on the black drive opened to a calendar export. Not just his, but several, layered. Meetings labeled mentorship, recurring Saturday lunches with names she recognized, reminders titled with first names and the word check-in. The second file was a string of emails routed through an assistant. Formal, careful, and in their sequence, unmistakable. Her attorney paused the screen and looked at her. "This doesn't finish it," he said softly. "But it changes the air." The call from HR buzzed her phone again. She let it ring. The drive's folders showed more dates she hadn't yet read. Somewhere between them and the committee summons was the path she would have to take next. The hearing was still on the calendar. The decision was still far away. And the story, as far as the world knew, was still being written by whoever spoke the clearest last. The night before the internal committee meeting, Emily sat at her kitchen table with the binder open, the black drive beside it. The apartment was silent, save for the low hum of the refrigerator. She had read through every file twice, each one confirming what she had felt but could never prove. She was not the first, and she would not be the last. Her attorney had advised against attending the committee without representation, warning that informal meant nothing once the minutes were typed. But ignoring the summons carried its own risk. A refusal could be spun as non-cooperation, a breach of professionalism. Her phone lit with a message from an unknown number. "If you say the wrong thing tomorrow, it's over." No name, no signature, no need for either. She took a slow breath and wrote a single sentence on a sticky note. "Tell the truth. Don't fill the silence." She stuck it to the front page of the binder, so it would be the first thing she saw in the morning. At dawn, she dressed plainly, nothing that could be read as calculated. When she arrived, the conference room door was already open. 3 people sat inside, their expressions polite, expectant. In the corner, a digital recorder's red light blinked. Before the first question was asked, the HR director leaned forward. "Emily," she began, "we're here to give you an opportunity to clarify some misunderstandings before this becomes more complicated than it needs to be." Emily glanced at the recorder, then at the faces around the table. She knew this wasn't a conversation. It was a narrowing corridor, one she had to walk through without losing herself. In that moment, the door behind her opened. Footsteps crossed the carpet. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. His voice carried the same calm authority it had in every private exchange. "I thought it would be best if I joined," Mr. Harper said, settling into the empty chair across from her. His smile was small, measured. "After all, we both want the truth, don't we?" The HR director folded her hands. "Shall we begin?" Emily met his gaze and said nothing. The recorder's red light kept blinking, and the question, unspoken but heavy in the air, was not what happens next. It was who will speak first. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought in courtrooms, but in the quiet moments when you decide who you are and who you will never become. For Emily, this isn't just about saying no. It's about holding on to the part of herself he can't buy, can't threaten, and can't take. And in that small conference room, with every eye watching, the question isn't just whether she'll speak, it's whether she'll be heard. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments. What moment in Emily's journey moved you the most? And if you were listening closely, you might notice how often Harper's name came up. Drop your answer in the comments. We may feature your name in a shout-out as a thank you for being part of our Fiction Echoes family. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this one, the next chapter is already waiting. Just click the video that's about to appear, and we'll see you there. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a moment of what happens next.